I think a lot of you are involved with the Zen Peacemaker tradition, and so this is familiar to you, but I also see some faces out there, people from the Toto Institute, members from the Toto Institute, and colleagues of mine, and this may not be as familiar to you. So the three tenets, as I understand them, of taking action from the Peacemakers tradition, number one is not knowing. So approaching a situation with kind of a not knowing mind, setting aside your fixed ideas and trying to meet the moment freshly. The second is bearing witness. So you're present to the situation with its joy or suffering without turning away. And the third then becomes taking action, some kind of compassionate response or compassionate action that naturally arises out of not knowing and bearing witness. I wanted to put this up there first, and then I want to show you the kind of comparable set of steps in Japanese psychology. So here we have the four elements of taking action. The first element is attention. Your experience of life is what you pay attention to. The second element is acceptance. There's a term in Japanese in Morita Therapy called arugamama, and I'll talk about that a little when we get to that step. That has to do with acceptance. The term radical acceptance, which comes from Marshall Linehan's work in a model of psychology called DBT, or dialectical behavior therapy. There's a related term that overlaps with this, but I think also has some differences, of surrender. I found that term to be present in Eckhart Tolle's work. And also there's a teacher in the yoga tradition named Michael Singer, who has a center in Florida. Some of you may be familiar with his work, and surrender is very much at the center of his work. But the idea of acceptance in Arugamama is just to accept things just as they are, things just as they are. The third step then is the taking action step. And one of the keys in Morita Therapy is that while in most approaches to psychology from the West, particularly, the idea is that we first have to somehow fix ourselves, fix our inner world. So if we have anxiety, if we lack confidence, if we have low self-esteem, we have to fix those things, and then subsequently we can take action. And one of the, I think, real distinctive characteristics of Morita's work is that it really teaches us that we can take action while we coexist with that inner world of feelings and thoughts and all kinds of things that are going on inside us. In other words, rather than address fixing those things first, we basically accept them and we coexist with them while we take action. And then there's a fourth step that comes after taking action, which is self-reflection. And this comes from an approach in Japan called Naikan, or Naikan self-reflection. It involves three questions in which you reflect on your support, your conduct, your karma, if you want to think of it that way, and the impact that you've had on others. So in other words, there's a reflective step that comes after taking action, in which we look back and we basically step back and look at what action we took and what support did we have, how that impact other people, even what troubles and difficulties did we cause in that process. Just as an aside, I want to mention this because I'm not going to get into depth on any of this material in this short period of time, but when I say Japanese psychology, I'm really talking about three approaches to psychology from Japan. One is called Morita Therapy, one is called Kaizen, and the third one is called Naikan. So Morita Therapy, I think, addresses the centerpiece of taking action. Kaizen is really a kind of strategic application of how to do this on a day-to-day basis, and Naikan is the reflective piece. So they're all represented in those four steps. What I'd like to do now is to put the peacemaker tenets on top of the Japanese psychology elements, and this is what you end up with. As you can see, they converge, so to speak, on this step of taking action. And when I put this slide together, it's a very simple slide, but it seemed a little bit too structured and rigid to me. So I came up with another idea. This is where the Zen Peacemaker tenets and the Japanese psychology elements have a picnic. So here's their picnic, which seems much more comfortable and relaxed. I like this a bit better than the previous slide.